This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Hi, guys. Today, we've got a special guest on the podcast. His name is Danny Ray. So he is a professional magician and an author. He is the first magician we've had on this show. So there we go. He has appeared on the Fool Us show with Penn and Teller. He did that just last year. And he's also the author of a book called No, I Can't Make Your Wife Disappear, A Magician's Guide to Magic or to a Magical Marriage. Didn't want to mess up the thing. A Magician's Guide to a Magical Marriage. So here's the thing about this interview. So I obviously asked him a lot about, magicians and, things that he likes and how he got into magic and all those types of things. But we get into some serious areas really from the beginning. We get into the fact that, he wasn't raised by his biological father, but he was raised by another man, his stepfather, and kind of how that affected him and affected his introversion and how he was going to get into magic. But as with anybody, when this interview was pitched to me, I was like, hey, how do you do the magician thing and do the Christian thing? Like, that just didn't seem like it would work in any way, shape, or form, because like a center point of magic is deception. And we know from all different examples in the Bible that, deception is not a positive thing. It's not something that we should be working through, but that is something that he explained. I really liked his answer on that, guys. I really enjoyed this interview with Danny Ray. I'm not going to keep him from you any longer. So without further ado, let's get into it. Danny Ray, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Okay, now I just told you off air that you're the first magician that we've ever had on this show, but I don't want to be offensive here. Are you a magician or are you an illusionist? Because like there's separate camps here, and I don't want people thinking that I'm calling you the wrong thing.
You don't want to call me like a necromancer or...
No. See, I would never do such a thing. Never.
I'm fine with either. So in like the magic world, if I said illusionist, they think like grand illusion stage. But in the Christian world, we tend to use illusionist more than magician. But technically, I would be a close-up magician is primarily what I do.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I will probably default to calling you a magician for the remainder of this. But if I slip in illusionist, don't judge me too harshly. But yeah, in a broad way to start this is obviously that's a very unique interest. A lot of people like watching magic or like watching illusions, but it's not ever something that they thought they would themselves would practice doing. I know I got like a magic kit when I was a little kid, but I was so terrible at finding the little seam in the card, with my thumb or whatever. So for you, I guess, when did you start being interested in magic?
Yeah, I think I would say like a similar thing where a lot of, young boys, sometimes girls will get into sleight of hand when they're a kid or they're interested in magic. And so I was probably 8 years old and got like a flip stick, where, it could change colors using a certain move. And then by 10 o'clock, by 10, I got my first magic book called Close Up Magic by Harry Lorraine. And it was primarily a card book. And I started working on, card tricks and sleight of hand. And I just never gave it up. I just kept working on it and developing it. And I think with my growing up, I had two dads, one that was present, one that was absent. And I think that, the absence of your biological father, there's a depth of pain there that I don't think I was aware of at 10 years old. And so when I found this, it became my escape. And so I would work on it day and night to kind of escape the pain, the struggle. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to get into this later on in the show, but since you brought it up, let's go heavy. Let's go heavy right from the beginning. But obviously growing up without your biological father, but you were essentially raised by a man, but it was your stepfather. Yeah. You've already said how that kind of affected how you internalize yourself, because magic is something that you perform for people, but you practice in private, like the reps over and over and over, getting good at it. And then you just basically try to fine tune it in front of people. Right. What else in your life affected you in that way? Because it wasn't like your biological father just wasn't there and there was no other man that filled the gap. There was another male there, but kind of give me a little bit more insight there.
Yeah. So I think when you, the way God's designed a family is when that person that, is supposed to be part of your life leaves, I think there's an absence in people that's just hard to, and this is why I think we have a lot of daddy issues in our cultures is men sometimes don't stick around. Men don't, do what God's called them to do in that area. And then it's hard to define timelines on this, but there was, sexual abuse and, just things that weren't supposed to happen. And you feel like there should have been somebody there to protect you. And so those things like got internalized too. So, where's the protector? Where's the father? And even though my stepdad, or, he's my dad, he was awesome. There was just a lot of things that he wasn't aware of at that time. And later on, when he became aware, we were able to talk about those things. But yeah, I think that those early years were really defined by the absence of a father and escaping in the only way I knew how, which was through sleight of hand. Yeah.
So, with that in mind, I'm curious, and if this is prying a little bit too much too early in the show, you can just tell me to piss off. But at the same time, I feel like when you're doing magic and when you're doing these things like card tricks are super impressive. People love them, and it blows their mind and all that. Do you feel like in a way you were trying to get good at those things so that you could gain acceptance from other men? Because obviously you tried this in front of men, and it was almost like, hey, Danny, you did a great job. I'm proud of you. Is that a part of it there? Or was it just, no, it was a great hobby. Am I reading into it too much, I guess?
No, there was definitely part of that. But I was so introverted at that time,
Mm.
and very few people saw outside of family members and aunts and uncles, what I did. I think at 12 years old, I did a show called Razzle Dazzle.
Yeah.
And I definitely wanted to impress, make proud, have people, go, wow, you're good at that. And I was okay at 12, but I think
Right.
that began a search in me for, why am I empty? And I didn't, grow up in the church. It wouldn't be until I was 17 years old that I gave my life to Christ. And so early on, like that emptiness, trying to fill it with magic, eventually with girls, yeah, dating and all that stuff, but it wasn't filling that hole.
So for you, was magic a conduit through which you became more extroverted, or was that just kind of something that happened over time as you grew older? Did something change when you did accept Christ at the age of 17? Kind of help me out with that.
Yeah, I think probably to a certain degree, I'm still pretty introverted, even
Okay.
though I'm in a lot of social settings all
Mm.
the time, and I really enjoy those. And it's so I wouldn't say like in terms of introvert, like I just don't want to be around anybody,
Mm.
but I think what happened was at 15 years old, I got a job at a restaurant. And my stepdad, right? He would go every week for 3 years through high school with me to this restaurant, and I would go to tables, and it's if you ever have to go up to a table and greet somebody and say, "Hey, I do magic. Do you want to see something?" And they reject you, like at 15 years old, like it's
Yeah,
like
that
it's
that
especially
hurts.
when you're not like yeah, it stings. Especially when you're not super extrovert. Like I don't care. I cared, and I go back to my dad and be like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this." He's all, you have to keep going. Look at this table over here. They look like they would have fun.
Mhm.
So I would go, and the next table would love it, And so I learned the rhythms of that, and I learned how to read people's body language a little bit better than I did at 15 when I started out. People would be really intimate in a conversation, almost nose to nose, and I'm trying to like, hey, you want to see a magic trick? Like, so I had to learn those social cues and stuff, but that helped get me, I think, out of like just doing bedroom magic for the mirror, and going, okay, these are real people that have real reactions. There's a real conversation going on. And so I had to learn that. And it was, I loved learning that side of it, and doing it for real people became a real joy of my life.
That's awesome. So you're kind of working your way to getting out of your shell. You're dealing with rejection. You've got all that stuff kind of going around. But this is kind of the big thing. Like whenever we figured out we were going to have you on the show and all that, I was like, okay,
Yeah.
Christian magician. Like those things don't seem like they jive very much because,
Yeah.
a major center point of magic or illusion is uh, kind of misguiding people and taking them on a journey and not always being completely forthright with them, which is akin to lying. And so for me, it's like, obviously, it's not like I don't enjoy magic as a Christian, but I could see maybe even at the age of 17, you accept Christ. Did that create an issue for you that you were working on something that was deception? and how, we see so many examples in the Bible of deception being called out as being sinful. So that's the $1 million question for the day. Magic and Christianity, how do they mix?
Yeah, so I get that, and here's what I'm convinced of. If somebody's like magic's always wrong, there's never like they're not going to even enter into a conversation.
Right.
I've tried to have those conversations, and some people are just so convinced because it's the same word that's used in the Bible. And at 17, I read the Bible, for the first time. I don't know if I read all the way through it, but I was reading different parts and read magicians are going to hell. I was like, that's not good. I don't know much, but I know that's not good, right? And
Right.
so I went to my youth pastor at the time and a couple other leaders, and they were like, no, what's going on in the New Testament and Old Testament with like calling up the dead and calling on evil spirits, all this stuff that has nothing to do with like, hey, here's a card trick, And so when we talk about deception or lying, is first of all in all of my presentations, I try to be as truthful as I possibly can be, even though everybody understands in a magic show, like you're entering into a world where you want to be fooled,
Mhm.
right? And so for that to happen, you understand that the magician's going to do things to, if you will, deceive you, but it's under that premise of entertainment. I'm not trying to take advantage of people or take somebody's money or do like like cruel things that I mean, there was a TV show a while ago that, where somebody would get people's information and say that they're talking to the
Right.
dead. And that stuff is so cringy to me because it's so personal. And I've read 1,000 things on that, on how to do that, and it works. The problem is you really are deceiving somebody at that point because you're not talking to their person that's passed on, even if you're saying you are, and it might even bring healing, but the ends don't justify the means in that. And how many people are broken when they find out that what really happened wasn't true. And so yeah, so my thing is it's entertainment. I think everybody going to a magic show these days isn't like, is he calling on demons to
Right.
bring the card to the top of the deck? Like, please, like, like, is it possible that this person worked on that technique to fool you? Like that's a much higher probability. But that's where I would say is we need to not leave our brains at the door either. Is look at other options besides there's a demon behind every door. That type of thing. So.
Right. Absolutely. That's what I figured you would say, something along those lines, because if you look at things categorically without putting context to it, it becomes a little bit of an issue. But again, I know people that they will not let their kids dress up for Halloween because it's All Hallows Eve, it's satanic, it's all those different things. And then there are other people that are on the Christian side. They're like, it's not that big a deal. My kid wants to dress up as Buzz Lightyear and go get candy. Like it's not the same thing. But for different people, there's lines that they're unwilling to cross, and that's good, and that's up to them. But for you, obviously, everyone knows now you are working as a professional magician, but that was not always your profession. So you actually worked in ministry before you decided to, follow your dream, as it were. So kind of take us through that trajectory, because it's like, this magic thing could just kind of be a thing that you do on the side. You do a few parties per year and then you've got your real job or whatever. But at some point you drew a line in the sand and you're like, no, I'm burning the ships. I'm going for it. So take us through that whole transition.
Yeah, so 17 years old, gave my life to Christ. At 18 years old, I do a show, and there's a guy that sees the show. He's a world renowned magician, and he says, "Look, Danny, I love your stuff. I'm going on tour. I'm starting out in Las Vegas, going over to New York, then over to Europe, and I want you to go with me. I want to train you. I want to show you the ropes." And to me, this is my dream come true. I'm so excited. Difference is now I'm a follower of Christ. So I pray about it and feel like God's saying, do not do this. And I'm like, but this is my dream, and at that time I wouldn't be able to articulate like that God's dreams are always bigger for us, that his dream for us is bigger than anything we could ever imagine. But at 18, I didn't know that. I just know God's telling me no. And so I went to this guy and said, can't, or I called him up and said, can't do it. And so at that during that same year when I was 18, I guess I would have been 19. At 19, got involved in youth ministry, and I'm volunteering in youth ministry. And then when I graduated from seminary, I became the youth pastor. And that season was just incredible. Like I loved working with students. I think God was preparing me to do more of a national, international ministry. And at 28 years old, we began to pray through what would it look like to really combine these two things together. And I'm reading through Romans 11:29, and it says God's gifts and his calling are irrevocable. So they're designed to be tied together, inextricable from one another. And so I knew at that point I needed to figure out how to combine these two. They were in two different worlds at that time. And so I'm at the gym and I'm on a stair. I'll say a machine. That sounds so much better.
Okay.
A machine. Yeah, I'm on a machine. But there's this magazine that I wouldn't typically read. It's there though, so I start flipping through. I think it was like a Time, maybe a Newsweek, and there's this article of this magician that I met when I was 18 years old, and he was up for all of these fraudulent charges for taking college students around the world. He would rack up their visas or their credit cards. And then once they maxed it out, he would leave them stranded around the world.
Wow.
Well, yeah, it was a crazy thing as I'm praying through this, going, God was protecting me at 18, and now at 28, showing me now's the time. And so we began to pray, seek wise counsel, and in 2003, we launched to do this as a full time ministry. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so you've done this full time. You've done a lot of touring. You've done tons of shows. I mean, probably definitely hundreds, but if not thousands and thousands of shows. But then it seems that it all kind of culminated with your appearance on Fool Us with Penn and Teller. And so I actually met Penn, at an event in New York years back. So great guy, but
Yeah.
obviously, very, very secular, very, very atheistic type person. So that I'm sure was interesting. But for those in the audience that are unfamiliar with the show Fool Us, what is the point of
Yeah.
that show? And I guess, how did you manage to get an invitation to go on there with your trick?
Yeah, the idea behind the show is, can you, as a magician, fool two of the greatest minds in magic, regardless of people's opinion of Penn and Teller from their thoughts on atheism or on faith. The reality is they're both very intelligent men that know magic really well, and they've studied it for decades. They've had live shows in Vegas for decades, and so the idea behind the show is, can you fool them? In the people that go on to the show, there's thousands of people that audition, handful of people that get on there, but only about 10% of the people that get on there fool them. And the thing with it is, they're trying to help magicians' careers, and whether you fool them or not, it really helps, your career as a magician. But they're not going to just say, oh yeah, we need, if we have four people on the show, we need one person to fool us every
Right.
week and three people not to fool us. They don't have a recipe, and it's just, if you fool them, you do. If you don't, you don't. And so yeah, the what led to going on to the show is, I've had people ask for years if I go on. There, after a show, people will come up, you should go on AG, America's Got Talent. You should go on Penn and Teller. And we just said no, no, and we pray about it, and really didn't feel like led to do that. And then during the pandemic, we were praying about it, and some other people had challenged me to do it at that time. And so we submitted a video, and through the exchange of like 23 emails, we ended up, so all that to say, long process.
Right.
We ended up getting an invitation to go to Vegas and
So
perform.
that's awesome. So you get there, and I'm just going to leave it to you right now. Take us through the entire experience, guys. In the show notes, I'll put a video of the performance and all that, so you can check it out. It's on your website. I'll make sure you guys have that. But what was it like? How did it turn out? Take us through the whole thing.
Yeah, so it's April 9th, and I get an invitation like, hey, we'll see you in Vegas. And I was excited, and then that came in at 12:36, I believe, p.m. At 12:37, I went, how do I fool them? And then I'm an early guy, so 4:01 a.m. the next morning, I'm like, how do I fool them? And so I had 70 days to develop, like, so essentially, if you haven't seen the routine, I play Russian roulette with my eyeball. And so essentially, if this piece doesn't work, there's a giant hook that's going to gouge out my eyeball. That's fun. So, which is right up Penn and Teller's alley, right? So I start working with the executive producers and the magic consultant, And we took something that was a really simple method, and I started to just put layer upon layer on top of this to really develop something that I really thought would fool them. And so there's 8 different layers to this piece that they wouldn't just be able to say, oh, we think you did this. They would have to say, we think you did kind of a combination of things. And so I went from a piece I've done literally thousands of times to literally killing it and rebirthing it. And I started practicing 6 to 10 hours a day. I would take 45 seconds of the routine and practice that 45 seconds, then reset it, and then start it again at that minute. And I would do that all day long and just did that day after day. I would do that for 10 days at a time and then work on the next 45 seconds and then do that, work on the next 45 seconds. And then the week before I show up for Penn and Teller, there's another magician that I highly respect that's also a follower of Christ. And he calls me up, he said, hey, I just heard you're going to be on Fool Us next week. And I was like, yeah. He's like, I think you should throw in the towel. I was like, what? I was like, I mean, we've been praying, we've been working. I'm like, where is this coming from? He's all, look, I've worked with them before. He's older than I am. He's worked with them before. He's like, they are cruel towards Christians.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't think you should do this. And I was like, oh, and he's like, I want you to watch some other videos. I'll send you some links. And you could look up for yourself. It's all over the internet. And he's like, I want you to pray about this. And this is a guy, I love this guy and respect him. And we've had a great relationship for a long time. And so I pray about it, but we just still feel like this strong, and watched a bunch of stuff, a strong like urgency to go there and to be a light and to be who God's designed me to go in the world, but not be of the world. And so I called him back and he kind of like pleaded with me a little bit more. And like one of his questions was like, do you really want a giant FU trophy? If you haven't seen the trophy before, it says Fool Us, and the letters the letters F and U are
Right.
huge. And then for the fool is OOL in real tiny letters. He's like, do you really want a giant FU trophy? Do you think that's an accident? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
kinda, but I didn't say that. uh, I understood that what he was saying is like, do you want something that's going to kind of represent this worldly, stuff? And so he prayed with me. He knew like I was committed to doing it, and he prayed that I would be a light, that I'd fool him, that I'd do great, all that stuff. And so I get away from that conversation, and I just start praying more. Well, I start reading through the book of Romans during that time. Fast forward a week, it's the day of the performance, and I have a long prayer that I wrote up and had a team of people that via Zoom we prayed together. But my prayer that morning was like, God, I pray that you would help me to fool these 2 guys. And that morning I read through Romans 8, that famous chapter, and came to that passage where if God is for us, for us, who can be against us? And like that for us just like stood out. And I was like, whoa, God, if you're for us, this trophy could go from fool us to a giant FU to the world to for us. God, you're in the business of redeeming things and turning the world upside down. In Acts 17:6, it says, that they were men who turned the world upside down. I was like, God, I want to be a part of those men that turn the world upside down. And this is in my prayer, if you allow me to fool them today, I will turn the trophy upside down if I win. And so I go downstairs, I go to the theater, they put me in, kind of the basement of Penn and Teller's like cellar of like all their old illusions. I'm looking around like, oh wow, okay, we have a lot of stuff here. And eventually they call me upstairs. You do a dress rehearsal right before you go on with Penn and Teller. The dress rehearsal consists of a fake Allison, if you will, a stand-in Allison, because that's who I'm going to do the piece for. She's the host. Penn and Teller, you're performing for them, and so right before they come on, I do this rehearsal, and in the middle of the rehearsal, I forget one of my lines. Now, I've worked on this once or twice a week with the executive producers. They're in the room, the director's in the room, a stage manager, a bunch of different people are in the room. And I'm like, hey guys, I need my line. I know you know it. Silence. Every time we practice Zoom, if I forgot something, they just say, oh, it's this, silence. And I'm like, hey guys, seriously, I don't know. And, the person's right here. I'm like, I guess I'm just going to do it. And so I finish it. And they're like, hey, Danny, we're not, this after I finish, they're like, we're not going to give you any lines anymore. It's like either sink, swim, do it. And I'm like, oh man. Well, the line I missed was I only have one shot to get this right. And so they're like, head backstage. We're going to bring them out. So I walk backstage, and I don't know if you're familiar with Hamilton, but there's a song in there where I'm not going to miss my shot. So I'm literally backstage, not going to miss my shot, not going to miss my shot. This is my shot. Don't miss my shot. And so then I walk out, they invite me out. And if you're not familiar with Penn and Teller, Penn does all of the talking in the show, and Teller is mute. He doesn't say anything. But when I walk out there, Teller's like, "Hey, Danny," this is the first time I've ever heard him talk. He's "You're gonna do great out there." I'm like, "Thanks." He's like, "Have fun." I'm like, "I'm looking forward to it." And then Penn says, "Yeah, have fun. It's always fun seeing what people come up with. Looking forward to it." And then they start talking amongst themselves. I do a couple stretches. And then Allison's off to stage left, and she's talking to the stage manager, and they finish up. All the lights come up. And by the way, there's 31 cameras in the room. So if you ever watch the show, they have an iPad where I don't know if it's an iPad, but they have some sort of device that they're on where they could look at all the different cameras. So you can't just like fool them from one angle. You have to fool them from every angle. And so Allison, she's off to stage left. She introduces, walks over. I do the entire piece for them. And then what happens is you walk in front of the table, and there was actually an area to stand if you're vaccinated, another area if you're not vaccinated. The crazy times we're in. So I take my place. We have a conversation on television. What it looks like is Alice and I talk for about 10, 15 seconds, and then Penn and Teller talk for about 10 or 15 seconds about the illusion, and then they go, okay, here's how we think you did it. In reality, that's about a 15 to 20-minute conversation. And so Allison and I are talking. There's a whole interview that's done. She's asking me tons of questions. They're talking about the piece. And the magic consultant who knew part of the method, I started to tell him, like, here's part of it, here's part of it. He's, oh yeah, that's enough. If they figure out this much, that's enough. They're gonna say, it didn't fool them. And so they talk about it, eventually invite me back, and the first thing that happens is Penn says, Danny, imagine that if, those holes, I have metal plates that have holes. He's like, imagine one of those is off center. That would give a magician a certain amount of leeway to do certain things. And then I immediately said, well, that's not how, it's done. And he's like, no, we're not saying that's our guess.
Yeah.
I was like, dang it. How many, like, by process of elimination, so I'm like, okay, I can't say anything anymore because how many guesses does this guy get, right? And so they take another guess, and which was if the device was gimmicked, I welcome them up to say, you're welcome, or no, I didn't welcome them up. I said, you're welcome to check it out. I was told by the magic consultant, the executive producers, oh yeah, they won't come up. It doesn't matter. Because can you imagine like them coming up? Like there's gimmicks everywhere, and when they did come up and Penn put his giant claw by some of the gimmicks, I'm like, oh no. But it was like, well, we're just going to have to like trust some of the psychology of like, I didn't move anything. In fact, I dropped one of the gimmicks like right by his hand. Because I know if you take something and you put it on the other side, it immediately draws attention to it. And so I just like, it doesn't matter, and dropped it right in front of him. And then, they examined it, and then Penn said, well, if that's not how it's done, you definitely fooled us. And the trophy came down. And then I shook his hand. I took the trophy.
There it is.
Here's the trophy. but I had practiced what it would look like in my room, but I was just like, okay, I have it in my hand. How am I going to turn it upside down? And so I grab it, I say, thank you. And I turn it upside down and walk off stage. Well, little did I know they would freak out. So the so you have two large teams, one large team backstage from another stage manager's back there. There's another person directing different stuff back there. All your
Mm.
sound tech, all that stuff is back there. The other magicians are ready now back there. Well, when I get back, there starts kind of bickering between the stage manager, like, we need to get Danny back here. The other guy, like, we're not letting him back. We need to get the other team. And they go back and forth. The executive producer's like, no, we need to finish one shot. I knew exactly why, right? But I was just like, well, and this is something that's like between me and God. Like, I wasn't like, I didn't know what was going to happen. I just was like praying and went, got it. I want to be a part of your redemption process. I'm going to turn the trophy upside down and represent, that this is now represents for us, that you are for us, for Penn and Teller, that you're for the executive producers, that you're for us, right? And so I I'm like watching them kind of go back and forth, and then eventually I'm like, "What do you want me to do?" He's all, "You're not going back out there." I was like, "Okay," and so they argue it out, and then it's like, "Nope, we're going to bring the next people on." And so they went, "Okay, now you could go back out, grab your stuff." And so I talked to Penn and Teller for a minute while I was out there, and but basically I just grabbed my stuff and went off stage. So I had no idea whether that part would air or not, or whether they would cut it. But they took a camera from a little bit further back, and sure enough, you have that moment where I turn the trophy upside down, and yeah, and so what a crazy moment in time.
Yeah, great experience. I'm glad you were able to go into all that detail because again, when you watch the video, it's just like, okay, this is happening. And I mean, I can't imagine the amount of time that you put into practicing it and, not doing a card trick, but choosing to do something that could have more things that could go wrong. I'm sure that was stressful, but
Yeah,
what a cool experience for you to do. Now I want to get into some kind of categorical stuff with kind of magic and different magicians. So for you personally, because I
yeah,
did some looking up online and people have their own opinions and everything like that.
yeah.
I want to know who you think, in your opinion, is the greatest magician of all time. And then
Oh
separately,
wow,
and they may be the same person, who's your favorite magician of all time?
wow, that's a
Yeah, I'm
I
making you
don't
pick
know
a favorite kid. I'm doing it.
exactly is there's so many great influences. If I had to pick one, so the thing is like most of the guys that I love and like I just think their stuff is off the charts amazing are people that only in the community would know. So Dia Vernon would be that person for me. He had more influence on my magic probably than any other person, and I would read his stuff and devour it and work on his material. Of the more famous magicians, David Copperfield had a massive influence. I'd watch him on television and was completely like inspired. But his inspiration for me, if you have ever watched one of his shows, he does all of this like giant grand illusion, but
Mhm.
then he does this one like piece that will be close up magic every time in his show. Just one maybe two pieces. Well, he would always say like that's the piece that always does the best. Well, when I was, I think 19 or 20 years old, well, actually, no. When I was 17 years old, I did a show for 2,000 people for the first time. It was really just one or two tricks that I did that somebody knew I did, sleight of hand. They brought me up and I did it. I had no idea if it'd work well for 2,000 people. It did. I think at 20 years old, I did it for the first time for 500 people, a whole show. And that kind of gave the genesis for like, oh, this could work to do a whole close up show. Because when I started doing it, it's become a little bit more popular, maybe in the last 4 or 5 years. But when I first started doing it, I couldn't find anybody, Christian or not, that was doing a whole close up show on stage and having it work. I talked to guys that said, "Oh yeah, that's terrible. It doesn't work. We've seen guys do it," and they would name like popular guys, and I would watch it, and basically they would sit down on stage at a table, invite people up, and so they didn't have like any interaction. It was
Mm.
just like, I'm just going to do my close up stuff here and you should like it. And so I had to figure out kind of that combination of stage presence, if you will, and using different parts of the stage and using, different people in the audience, yet still using just primarily, cards, coins, rubber bands, cup and ball, things that are close up in nature to watch. But what we would hear is, I was in the back of the room, but it was like I was right there with you. And so that helped us to get a glimpse inside that this could work for any size group.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question. In your opinion, what kind of magic is better? The up close sleight of hand stuff, like the David Blaine stuff on the street kind of a thing, or the big theatrical productions like David Copperfield does? And I am asking, which is better? I know they're both difficult, but what do you think is better?
Yeah, I think you're right. They're both difficult in different routes. Like one is very theatrical, and we could say, oh well, they're just dancing around a box. But to think about the choreography and the moments and the timing that goes into a stage piece like that is part of the creating that experience. Now, I think most magicians would agree, like the technical side of close up magic just requires a lot more technique and development that way. But stage magic, it just takes a different mind to develop great stage pieces. And really, when you develop a piece, like Sawing a Woman in Two, which 2021 was the 100-year anniversary of Sawing a Woman in Two. And at the time, that wasn't just the greatest like magic trick, it was the greatest piece of entertainment. People were coming from everywhere to see a woman. Like it was like this piece that people would hear about and everybody wanted to see it. And so now, it's just kind of commonplace. But yeah, for me, I think that the sleight of hand is the stuff that I enjoy the most. I'll put it that way. I know there's other people that might enjoy stage, but I do think they're the same art with different branches. So you have like comedy magic, close up magic,
Right.
stage magic. There's different branches of magic, and I've learned to enjoy most of those. So.
Yeah, I would say when you strip away the dancers and the lights and the smoke and all that stuff, and it's just right there in front of you. Like that's why when you watch some of the David Blaine videos and you're seeing like these
Yeah.
celebrities or people, like they're right there on top of him and they can't figure out what he's doing. Like it's mind blowing even just watching it on video. But one thing I was curious about as well, Danny, is your
Yeah.
thoughts on the Masked Magician. Okay, so that was Val Valentino in the
Yeah.
'90s. There was a TV show called Breaking the Magician's Code, and I remember being very entertained by this as a viewer, right? Because I'm in like elementary school at the time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's like showing us all these magician secrets and all these types of things. How is he still alive? Why haven't they buried him in the desert by now? But I can't imagine being happy about it if I myself were a working magician. But then other people were like, no, Val Valentino was pushing magicians to be better and to create, better illusions and things like that. But for you, were you aware of that show at the time? And I
Yeah.
guess okay. So what were your thoughts on the Masked Magician?
So initially, like what he was doing was like revealing mainly stage magic, so it didn't
Mhm.
have like as a big of an impact on my career. Here's the problem with going like, oh, it's just going to push magicians, all that kind of stuff. Is it comes down to an ethics issue? Is you don't own the rights or the blood, the sweat, the tears that went into developing those pieces, and so that's the painful part, but it's been going on for years. There was, cigarettes you could get at one point. I want to say this was like in the 20s or 30s, where inside of the pack of cigarettes there was the revealing of a magic trick. Now it was like a really simple
Yeah.
like thing, but it's been going on for years. And now with the rise of YouTube, obviously you could get almost anything out there. And the excuse that way is, I'm more interested in how it's done. If you look at magic as a puzzle, but magic isn't designed to be a puzzle. Nobody at the end of building a puzzle is like, my mind is blown. I do not know where reality is right now.
Right.
Like, that's not the way a puzzle works. I don't care. Name any puzzle you want. No, Rubik's Cube, arguably the greatest puzzle of our day, right? Nobody like solves it and they're just like, this is the greatest moment, but when David Copperfield makes the Statue of Liberty disappear, when you have something, if you've ever been to a close-up show and something changes right in your hands, there's a moment of astonishment that is real. The sleight of hand and all that kind of stuff, isn't the real part. That could be explained. But those moments that take us back to that childlike wonder is real. And that's the part that you can't explain, is what is it that create, or that, I guess that's the deeper part that interests me, is more the psychology of how do you fool somebody? How, with Penn and Teller, how did I figure out how do you fool two guys that know everything, and had to come at it from different angles. And so, yeah, exposure, I think, is just a part of the culture now. But to me, ethically, I've designed my own pieces and they take years to develop. And for somebody, in fact, you could look at quote unquote the exposure of my trick. Somebody has like, here's how Danny did it. That's not how I did it.
Yeah.
That's just that guy's theory on how it's done. And he put a lot of time into this thing, both the video side of it and coming up with a method. I was like, wow, that's like a legitimate method. It wouldn't work, but it's like a legitimate, if I was doing it with paper, maybe that could work. But doing it with metal, and he didn't put that into the equation. But it's kind of a bummer for those things that he doesn't have to put 2 years of his life into developing that. He probably put, maybe 100 hours into that project, maybe a little bit more, but I put years of my life into developing that. And so, but at the end of the day, he doesn't expose it. But for people who aren't in the know, which there's only two people in the world who know how I did it, they're going to go, oh, that's how he did it, and assume that that's true when it's not. So it's those things I think are just part of the culture. But I think it comes down to an ethics: is, do you have the right to do that? But people aren't approaching it that way. I don't think most followers of Christ are going, how can I expose everybody around me? But anyways,
Right. I
yeah.
understand. So I appreciate you going into that detail. Now, this next
Yeah.
question is from my wife,
Oh,
because as I was preparing the interview, I was like, hey, babe, what would you ask a Christian magician? And that's the only tee up that I gave her.
yeah.
And she immediately responded, if you could do a magic trick for Jesus, which trick are you going with? Because I mean,
Wow.
this is the son of God here. Like, I'm assuming he can figure it out. Like, if he can figure out what people are thinking in their heads and call them out for it, I'm assuming that, you'd have to do something a little bit different. But if you're before Jesus and you could do one trick for him, what are you doing?
Wow. Wow. So first of all, let's just be clear. I don't think I could fool Jesus.
Right. Well, we're all assuming the same thing.
uh, but honestly, like I look at all of this stuff, where it talks about, in all things to glorify Christ. And so, we pray before every show, asking God to give us favor, that this would be the best show we've ever done. And so I feel like all of it, like I'm really trying to honor him with what I do. But if I was to pick one, it would be the prediction that I do at the end of my show. But that would mean Jesus would have to sit through the whole show to get it. But the reason why is I always try to save my best stuff for last. But it also, to me, it represents what Jesus does in our life so well. Is just to give you like a little glimpse. Is at the end of my show, I have books that are scattered all over. I have hundreds of cards just everywhere. I have paper that's been ripped up that's everywhere. And I say, what if in the middle of this mess, there's actually a plan? What if in the middle of our crazy lives, there's actually a plan? And so I wanted to give you a glimpse of that. And then I go through the prediction and I say, if I could come up with, a plan, and everything's like, oh, he meant to drop that card. He meant that book. He meant, like it's all of a sudden, it's like everything's coming together. It's like, when you watch Sixth Sense for the first time, you're like, oh,
Right.
like I'm
Right.
trying to create that moment where you see all these pieces coming together. And I think I know Jesus sees me, but if he's like in the flesh saying, I'd want to see and just say, he's the one that could do that for us, to show us how things make sense in the middle of our mess. because our prayer is like, let's just get out. But Jesus seems to say, no, I'm going to be with you and take you through. And we don't like going through, the struggle, the pain, the suffering, but it's clear in the scriptures that we don't get to avoid that.
Absolutely. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, Danny, is you actually wrote a book. And so I've got it here. I appreciate you sending this our way. It's No, I Can't Make Your Wife Disappear, A Magician's Guide to a Magical Marriage.
Yeah.
So, to my knowledge, you are the only magician / illusionist that I know of that also has a marriage advice book. Okay. So if there's another one out there, I don't know that that's a big category of books. So take us through. I did have a question about something specifically from the book, but for you, why write a book? Why not write a how to do magic book or magic for kids or something like that? Why write a marriage advice book?
Yeah, it is. As a pastor, I end up, doing a lot of marriage counseling over the years. My wife and I've, done our fair share of counseling, and we've gone to a bunch of conferences, read a bunch of books over the years. And the thing is, we just wanted to figure out how can we help people have a strong marriage. Like we just feel like this is the foundation for culture. Period. Is strong marriages, and they seem to be eroding fast. And I'll just say America. I don't know about the world, but America. And so we were coming up on our 25th anniversary, maybe at year 22, 23. And I was like, what would it look like to take biblical principles and magic principles and figure out where those line up and put a book together where we could, there's a lot of fun and, of the magic side of it, but also some depth with like, here are some biblical principles and practical strategies for how you can live this out in your marriage. And so, yeah, for our 25th anniversary, we released, or actually, we didn't release it then, but we were in the process of finishing it and worked out a book deal with it by that point. I wanted to release it on that date, but we ended up releasing it the same year.
Gotcha. And so there's a lot of great tangible marriage advice in there. So guys, that will be in the show notes as well, that you can pick up a copy off your website. But there's kind of a crazy story in this book that I've got to get you to give me a little bit of info on.
Uh,
And it's from the introduction. I think you know where I'm going with this.
okay.
You tell a crazy story. Okay. Like if you put yourself there, guys, for listening to this, put yourself in this position and imagine what you would be thinking. You were underwater in a barrel. Okay. You were handcuffed and you lost your cool. So you lost your cool in the middle of this trick. And, there are some consequences if you lose your cool and, can't keep yourself together. You had to get saved. So I want to kind of get an idea of what was that like? And then how do you get your nerve back and, get your edge back as a magician, needing to do these things that are supposed to look more death defying than they actually are, but are dangerous. How do
Yeah.
you regain that after having such a snafu?
Yeah, so that was in New York. I don't know if I talk about this part of it. I think I do. Is the night before my daughter saw it for the first time, and my wife ended up like carrying her out of the room, and she was freaking out, and so I end up in New York the next night. I'm doing this piece in. I would assume most of you haven't done underwater
No,
escapes,
no.
and so I trained for years and years, and I have been able to work with the best escapologist in the world. That's trained David Blaine, that's trained Chris Angel, that's trained guys you wouldn't know that are different escapologists around the world. And I was able. He lives pretty close to me, so I've met with him for decades now, and he trained me in these situations. Like, here's what you need to do. So we would practice, and when I would practice, we would always like, get a handcuff off, and that's the only way you could get the outside world to hear. So you tap from with the inside or with the handcuff on the inside of the chamber, because there's no other way for them to physically see you. They could only hear you. Well, that night I'm underwater, and I realize I've had my mind on my daughter and her freaking out, and I'm not out of my first handcuff, and I'm starting to lose my air. And I don't know how long I was under. I know at that time I could hold my breath for a little over 4 minutes, but I had to be in the 3 minute range. And I start to let out air, and I'm like, I'm not even out of the first handcuff. So instead of hitting the edge with the inside of the chamber with a handcuff, I'm trying to hit it with both hands. Well, I could hear the music is so loud out there. I'm like, there's no way Jeremiah's going to hear me. So I try to get out of the first handcuff. I get just one part of it out and I start clicking. He has at least five of the locks on the outside. I'm like, I don't have much time left. And I'm losing air by the second, and then all of a sudden, I hear the lid lift, and I just bolt out, and I'm like, and just completely exhausted and out of breath. And Jeremiah and I talk for a minute. He's like, I don't think you should go back in there. I'm like, dude, I am not gonna just get out. I'm doing this thing. He's like, okay, you need to take some deep breaths. He could tell, like, like I'm exhausted already. And so I do, a few breathing exercises there. And then I do it again. I go under and I cannot get focused. I come back out again, and Jeremiah's like, this is the last time. I don't care what happens. If you don't get out this time, I'm pulling you out physically. You're not doing this. And so I convince him to do it one more time. I go under, and same thing. I just am not in a place where I could focus. And so I come up again, and Jeremiah's like, we need to pull the plug on this. And so I get out, I go dry off, and I come back out and I talk about, sometimes we just fail and sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we're not going to get out. We're not going to escape and we have to deal with the pain of that. And I literally just wanted to escape and just run 100 miles away. But I go to the back of the room, and person after person was so moved by that message. Honestly, I couldn't tell you like verbatim what I said. I just know the Holy Spirit had to have been speaking because people were just so moved by that at the back of the room. Just thank you for not getting out. I'm all, what? This is dumb. Like
Yeah.
I was supposed to get out, but they were like, some people thought that's really the way I did it every time. I was like, no, I get out every time.
Right.
But those are hard moments to go back to. The next time was difficult to like, am I going to get out of this again? I had another situation with a straitjacket, and there's 100 gimmick straitjackets. The problem is when you work with the best in the world, he's all, I will never put you in a straitjacket that's gimmicked. And not only that, I'm going to put you in a small straitjacket so you will have to struggle every time. You will never have to act in this thing. I'm like, okay. Well, when he strapped me in there the first time, I was like, this is absolutely impossible. How am I going to escape from this? But that's when I do, escape stuff or this thing with the Russian roulette, is I try to create as much believability, even though I am working on always having a way out, except for once.
Man, that I just got to tell you, like, I'm getting like sweaty palms even thinking about that situation because it's like I don't want to be anywhere near something like that. But I appreciate you going into that detail. But Danny, before we let you go, there is something that I like to do towards the end of my interviews.
Yeah.
It's a segment called "What Would You Say to Someone That Said." So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say,
Okay.
"What would you say to someone that said?" And I'm going to fill in the blank. But here's the deal: this is lightning round. Okay, you
All
get
right.
30 seconds maximum to respond to this random thing, and it's going to be all over the place. But 30 seconds maximum. You up for it?
I love it. All right.
Okay, here's the first one. What would you say to someone that said, "Magic is for children"?
I would say children don't know what magic is. You can't fool them. The more you understand the world around you, the more you'll appreciate magic.
All right, next one here. What would you say to someone that said, "There is no such thing as the perfect magic trick"?
I would agree. It's always a work in process. It's a living, breathing art. Even though I've done a piece 1,000 times, the next time I do it, I have to make sure I'm cognizant of everything that's around me to make sure that that piece will work for that particular audience.
All right, next one here. What would you say to someone that said, "Magic in all forms is satanic"?
I would say let's have a conversation about that. I think that's a long conversation. I think that's a deep set of beliefs, and I'd really want to be curious. And I have done this. I'd be curious of where that came from, where they were taught that, and how. I want to hear their story.
All
Yeah.
right. What would you say to someone that said, I don't like being fooled.
Don't come to my show. Is yeah, it's not just about being fooled. It's about experiencing that wonder and that amazement that's rare in our culture.
Absolutely. What would you say to someone that said, my kid says that they want to be a magician someday?
Making mom proud.
Yeah. Hopefully that's how it goes. All right, just a few more left here. What would you say to someone that said, I don't know that God can save my marriage?
Hmm. As I would say, God's in the business of doing the impossible. He loves you, and hang in there. Don't give up. Do whatever it takes on your side of things to try to create a great marriage.
All right, just a couple more here. What would you say to someone that said, I know how you did that trick?
I would probably just smile and laugh and like, okay.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, and usually I'll listen to their method and go like, that's not how I did it. But, smile and nod, smile and
All
nod.
right, Danny, last question of the day. What would you say to someone that said, I really wish you could make my wife disappear?
I would say she's already paid to have you disappear.
Hey, and I will say that's not me saying that. That's somebody else. I love my wife. I don't want her to disappear. But Danny, I really appreciate all the detail that you've given us and all the stories that you told us. But that is all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, thank you for having me on. Really, yeah, thankful for what you're doing, Kyle. And yeah, that's
All
it.
right. Danny Ray, thank you for coming on Undaunted Life, a Man's podcast. There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Danny Ray. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So the link I've got for you today gets you all kinds of stuff. And it is just a link to Danny's website, DannyRayMagic.com. You can buy the book there. You can watch the video of when he was on Fool Us with Penn and Teller. All that information is there. You can check it out. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to the show. We do appreciate it. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's INFO @Undaunted.Life. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok and like us on Facebook, and you can check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And we want to also thank the band August Burns Red for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Cutting the Ties, which is off their 10th anniversary re-recording of their album Leveler. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.